No matter who you are, where you are, what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed, the light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now.
Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul Mastery's Live Well, Live Whole podcast series. I'm Marie Mohler. I'm an author, intuitive, and a messenger of higher consciousness and a host of these podcasts. And I'm here today with Dr. Paul Panzica. We're back again today. I always love talking with you, Paul. And I know not everybody resonates with these messages that we can go deep. We can go deep into the fibers of the tapestry of this planet in timeless ways. And we are both, what I love about both of us, Paul, is that we're open to going where we need to go and being conduits of, our collective soul wisdom here and for the collective. So I want to say thank you for joining me, first of all. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for having me again.
And really, I always love to toss it to you now because there's a lot in your awareness that I know is percolating. So why don't you lead us off? Where do we want to go today? Where do we want to go in like our starship into the realms of consciousness?
Well, yeah, I can go deep. I can go so deep that I can get lost and it will be like isolated in a universe all by myself that nobody understands. So you do have to be careful about that. And I also, I have been given vision. And that was a process that was gifted to me at some point in my life. There's so much information there that I feel that it'll last for many more lifetimes. There's so much. It's like you're given all this information and then you get to a point where it's almost not worth assimilating anymore until everyone catches up, That's that you can get to kind of almost a limit of that information. You can be one of the greatest human being that was ever incarnated into this earth. We can make an argument for who that person was. And, if they don't recognize that person for who he is, what's the point of being here if you cannot be recognized for the truth that you carry with you? So there has to be others who can see the truth that you're articulating or that you manifest. And again, I think we're getting to the point where there are many, I hope, and that number hopefully will continue to grow. But there's a limitation to what a person can do if they're given a tremendous amount of information, and there's no one who can see it or hear it. So we have to understand there's a limitation to what we can convey. So what I'd like to talk about, I think there's a lot of things I'd like to talk about, but listening to your last few transmissions, maybe we should talk a little bit more about the Lionsgate portal. I don't know when this will air, but it's something that's very close to your heart, and you're a Leo person, and so that resonates very strongly with you. And the last time we spoke, you asked some questions about the Lionsgate portal, and I had written an essay about it, and I wrote a second essay about it shortly, actually this year, over the last few weeks. And there was some more information that I wanted to convey, but there was something else that somebody steered me towards that kind of blew my mind regarding the Lionsgate portal. And so it's something that I wanted to bring up, and we can start with that and we can move forward with that. But, we have this numerology and this 8-8 and this infinity symbol that we talk about. And what does that suggest to us? And that suggests to us, in some ways, we can look at that as a symbol of infinity or timelessness. You know, so it is, let's say, in a dimensional state beyond the physical plane, is the symbol of infinity. It's beyond anything that we can experience within a physical linearity, right, or a physical plane. So why is this time of the year so important? And as you had mentioned before in a previous lecture or previous discussion, that this was a very important time for the Egyptians, and that it was looked at as a New Year's celebration. Not exactly that date, I believe, but the time was looked at as, the way that it was determined was by the rising of certain planetary bodies. They call it a heliacal rising. And a heliacal rising is when if you're waiting for the sun to rise and you're looking at the visible stars that are just preceding the sun rising. When that's called a heliacal rising. It's the star that rises right before the sun. And that star that they looked for was Sirius. And Sirius is the largest or the brightest star in the heavens. It's Sirius. It's also called the dog star. And so the dog star, Sirius, started to rise in that fashion. Actually, it's close to a conjunction with the sun, which means it's in close proximity to the sun. And that starts around the 4th of July. Actually, it starts around that time. But it gets closer and closer and closer and closer and closer until there's no other stars that precedes it. And when it gets that heliacal rise, about right, the last star to rise before the sun, that's really when the celebrations, or when they really paid attention to it. And that's kind of like when the Lionsgate portal would open up around this time. Now, when does that happen? Heliacal rising, I think, is late July, but they consider this time from late July till probably right about this time that we're giving this lecture or this discussion, which would be the first couple weeks of August, right? So this is a very important time. Now, from a Christian perspective, or from a Western mythological perspective, this is what I didn't realize, is that it's extremely important. And so this is the kind of like lost information that no one taught, at least not in the churches that I was familiar with. They never taught this. So why is this important to our culture and our society? And it has to do with the Sirius energy. Now, the Egyptians looked at Sirius as a goddess. And I love this. I mean, I just love this. They depicted the star Sirius as a feminine goddess. Now, you should probably appreciate this to a very high degree, because you're talking to the Arcturian collective. Now, right? So the idea is that when worlds start to ascend, at some point, not only does our consciousness start to meld, but we start to become kind of a one being, not just one being amongst our species, but one being amongst our biosphere.
Yes.
So we become one with the biosphere. Now, this is maybe a long way off. I mean, I'd like to think that it's a long way off, only because, there's a lot of steps between the point that we're at now and the point that we're all becoming one with the biosphere and we lose our personal identity. I think there's a lot of steps that I'd like to experience and enjoy before we get to that point. But that's the direction that ascended worlds take. They get to that point. So let's say the Venusians, no, they're not there. The Pleiadians, they're not quite there yet either. But the Arcturians, yes, the Sirians are there. They're considered like the godfathers or the grandparents of human cultures. And so they're there. And so the Egyptians intuited, or were told, or just knew that Sirius was a divine goddess. She was a feminine goddess. Now, so, and her pictures, or she's depicted as this goddess, and she holds in her hand an ankh. So I have to remind everyone what an Ankh is. So the goddess of Sirius, her name was Sopdet, 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 and she held an Ankh. And so what the Ankh represents, if we think of an Ankh, which looks like a cross, but on the top has like a teardrop shaped or a round shaped top. Then there's a line. Then there's the bottom part, which is, so there's you got a horizontal line, and then you got the vertical line underneath it. So it's called an Egyptian cross. Okay, and so what that represents, what the Ankh represents, in one interpretation, is an interface between certain levels of existence or levels of consciousness, or just let's say densities of existence. So what the horizontal line represents is a plane, and that's the interface. And below that plane is a linear vertical line. Okay, so it represents, we can say, linear time. Time in a linear fashion, existence in a linear fashion, a beginning, a sustained presence, and an end. But above that line, in a more spiritual realm, time bends back upon itself, and it exists more in a circular fashion, right? And so that Ankh represents the interface between both of those, and quite frankly, that's what we are as human beings. We exist in both parameters. We exist in a linear time continuum, but we also can exist in a non-linear time continuum. And I've talked about this before with dreams, and how dreams we can connect into the dream state, and we're in a different state of consciousness that can see into the future. All right. So this goddess represents this higher state of consciousness. So she was also considered Isis. Oh. So there's a very close relationship with Sopdet. She kind of like, okay, if Isis had a star, or if Isis had a celestial body, this would be her, right? And Isis is Sophia. So the Egyptians called her Isis, the Greeks called her Sophia. So she was wisdom. Okay. So she's an Isis Sophia being. All right. So the celebrations were based upon rebirth. So when these alignments would occur, then they knew that very shortly the Nile River would be overflowing its banks, and that this was the time for rebirth, renewal, floods, and rebirth and regeneration. So it was considered around this time the most holiest of times, and it was kind of like a New Year's celebration. Everything rolled into one, and it was a very holy time. So that's what Sirius can represent. It represents that energy. But understand that when it's in conjunction with the sun, then not only is it empowering the sun, but the sun is a masculine energy. So now we see the union of Isis Sophia in the form of this amazing planetary body in conjunction with the Logos energy. So now, especially when we see this in conjunction together, we start creating timeless states of consciousness. It's only there for a little bit. And so we can say that the portal opens up sometime around the 8th. And I think that's what these people were connecting to. So there is something called the Transfiguration of Christ. And the Transfiguration of Christ is celebrated depends on your church. Some churches celebrate it in the time that precedes Easter. Some churches celebrate it on the 6th of August. It's very close to the portal. Our church never celebrated on the 6th of August, so I was completely unaware of the connection till I realized that, and some of the Orthodox churches and some of the other churches, they celebrate it very close to the Lionsgate portal. So you can say, and that's how in Western religion, so to speak, or in the Christian religion, these celebrations are all based on pagan rituals. Christmas and and Easter and all these, they're all based on earthbound rituals that tie into the season, the seasonal patterns. Mm. So, this would be a perfect time for the transfiguration of Christ. So what was the transfiguration of Jesus? And so that's something that we want to think about. And so it's very well laid out in the scriptures. And this occurs very close to the time that Jesus was laying down some pretty heavy stuff to us. This was the time that he said, right around the time that he said, if anyone cares, if anyone is interested to come after me, or anyone is interested in coming after me, that they must take up their cross, and that they must take up their cross, and they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. All right. So now, then this kind of leads into some really interesting discussions regarding the fact that you're going to have to go through a lot of hardship, this crucifixion. And we talked about this during this summer season, that there was this crucifixion that was going to manifest. So the apostles weren't really happy about that. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
This is so fascinating. I love, because I travel with you, where you take me into these worlds that you see and these understandings. But when they take up their cross and they deny themselves, can you just give a little description of what that means? Is that like surrendering your lower ego will and joining?
Yes. Yeah. So, there's different levels of will. Mm-hmm. And so most of us live within the will of our ego. And there's been very prominent people within science and within the media that's basically come out to say that there's no such thing as free will. And based on that perspective, they're right. There isn't, because everything that the ego wants is based upon some form of programming. So why would I want to drive a Lamborghini, 12-cylinder car that gets 5 miles to the gallon and goes 250 miles an hour, right? But if you're shown this car and shown how great it is, then you're going to want it. Wow, it's all. So that's an extreme case. But why would I want to get a poisonous injection, or why would I want to do these things? And the answer is it's because your ego has been manipulated. It's been shown, and it's been manipulated very craftily. Very craftily. Most of this is based on what they call Hegelian dialectics. Oh. And this is what they and then, so they when they want to sell, they used to do this to us all the time as physicians. They would say, they'd have these people from the drug manufacturers come in, and then they would try to sell you these, extremely expensive medications that have nothing but side effects. And they would say, okay, well, give me 5 minutes of your time, and I'm going to give you this, basically what amounts to a commercial. And all commercials are based on the same Hegelian dialectic. It's called crisis, reaction, solution. Yes. Crisis, reaction, solution. So let's say we're trying to make a medication to control your blood pressure, and it didn't work very well, but it gave men tremendous erections. So we got a use for this, right? And so what they did was they created a marketing strategy to market to men, or the targeted audience, and basically, what you want to do is you want to portray a picture that the person that you're trying to sell this to can identify with.
Yes.
All right. So let's portray a picture, and we're going to call it, do you have these symptoms? And if so, you suffer from this condition.
Right.
Oh my God, I never knew I had this problem. I never knew that was a problem. Oh, what? And so you portray the crisis. This causes a reaction within the human soul that starts freaking out. We got to do something about this. Now, the only reason why you're being shown this in the first place is because there's a solution that we're trying to sell you.
Correct. You're being led to that point. The whole reason of the crisis was to get you to the solution.
Yes. Usually what they do is they limit your choice when they're trying to sell you a drug, and they're trying to say, okay, well, this drug doesn't work very well, but this drug works better. Which one will you use, doctor? And my usual answer is none of them. I don't treat it this way. I'm a holistic doctor. I can do all kinds of things without having to succumb to that paradigm. But what they do is they plant it within your mind. This is how the mind works, and then they try to get on personally. This is why we have all these likable personalities that sell us stuff.
Pharmaceutical sales.
Like them. They're not just selling you pharmaceuticals. They're selling you political ideas.
Right.
They're selling you everything under the sun is what they're selling you. And so this is how the ego gets programmed into this crisis reaction solution. Before they even create the marketing, they already have an agenda that they want to sell. They're going to try to figure out how are we going to package this to
be palatable and desirable, basically.
Yes, to swallow this up, and we got this agenda we want to push, and so okay, let's come up with this idea, and you can apply it to what's going on today, right now. So, in that perspective, the ego, really, there is no such thing as free will. The ego is keying off of all of the forms of religion, all of the forms of education, all of the forms of conditioning that it's been subjected to since birth. And it cannot escape that paradigm. And so, there are studies looking at the subconscious playing a role in all of this, and studies showing that people already make their decisions before they even make it. They're just not consciously aware of it. And so that is a lower form of consciousness. It's a lower form of will, and it's egotistically based will. And so when Jesus says, you must deny yourself, he's saying that you must deny this process. You must disengage yourself from egotistical thought. And you have to then put yourself into a higher realm of consciousness.
Which is outside of linear time.
Outside of linear time, and your ego cannot project the direction that you're going to go in that state of awareness. Now, that's called free will. That's free will. Free will is not what you want to do. Free will is not what you think you egotistically want. That's not free will. That's conditioned program will. It's not free will. It's not free will. And there's a lower form of will that's based on sentient needs. Animals have this. It's an animalistic will. It's primal will. It's survival instincts. That's another will, and that's the lowest form of will. But the highest form of will is the will of your higher self. And this is what people have a much, much harder time understanding, is that, wait a minute, if I don't get to decide, then that's not free will. Well, yes and no. Your ego doesn't know what the hell it wants because it's been conditioned by all of these factors since your conception, or since your incarnation into this realm. And there are many people that think they know everything, and it's just all conditioned, regurgitated knowledge. It's nothing. The mystics would call that lower manas, or lower intelligence. That's egotistically based, and it's really mundane, and it's really worthless. They call higher intelligence or higher manas true wisdom. And now you cannot get that unless you connect to a higher spiritual source. Now, in that higher spiritual realm, you don't know where it's going to go. And how do you navigate yourself, within that parameter is not from your head. It's from your entire body, but specifically from your heart. And then you feel your way through it. But the head is still important because you're getting messages now constantly from other realms and other places and other sources. Maybe from scripture, maybe from mythology, maybe from my dream, the amazing dream that I had this morning, maybe from all of those things. But the reason why you have this amazing egotistical intelligence is to interpret those visions. And it works then in conjunction with the heart, right? And so the higher realm speaks to us constantly, and gives us this information. So now we're given this information. So that's what it means by denying your egotistical will or yourself, and then taking up the cross and following me. Now, why is that? Why do I have to pick up a cross? And the answer is because you're still living within a third density egotistical plane. And for those who are moving out of it, it's going to be very arduous, and it's going to be difficult. Those who try to manifest unconditional love in a conditional state or a conditional reality are going to run into some big problems. And so it's going to be rough.
Seems like that just rubber bands people. I know, I see that in some, certainly we all do, and some people that we know that kind of want to, in some ways, just transcend the cross-bearing aspects of things and go into the unity consciousness where we've already just transcended all of this. Is that also what you're talking about? Is there's a purposefulness to the cross we're carrying as we follow?
Oh yes.
Right.
Oh yes. And I was just listening to another interesting source within the last few days saying, those, and I hate to say this, but this is the new age mantra, is that we can be co-creators of our own reality, and all we have to do is focus on the positive and everything's going to be great. Guess what? It isn't going to happen that way. In fact, this person or this source was suggesting that's a form of mind control. The law of the universe is not overt positivity. It never has been. It's balance. The law of the universe is karmic balance. And so we have to, again, integrate the dark with the light. We have to move forward in this way. We cannot walk away from our own mistakes and transgressions. It has to be integrated. Carl Jung, amazing man, he said, there's no way you're ever going to come to perfection. He said the closest thing we got to perfection was this guy, Jesus Christ. And he said, you won't come to perfection, not in the near future, but you must come to wholeness. Mm-hmm. You must become a whole person. You must embrace all of it, and you must become, like you said in your beautiful lecture, we must become alchemists or
alchemists and alchemists.
Right, because it's a chemical process. It's a process of transformation, which we're moving towards, which I want to get to in just a minute, right? So the only thing I wanted to mention is that when you move into this higher state of consciousness, where your ego is no longer calling the shots, your heart is leading you. Joseph Campbell said, it's as simple as following your bliss, that sense of peace and that you get, and the love that you get when you allow your heart to lead. Okay, that is in a higher state of consciousness. Now, it is free will. Why is it free will? Well, this is the paradox. If you haven't experienced it yet, you will. That being that you're following is you. It's you. It's your higher self, but it's you. It has your best interest. It knows who you are. You are a part of it. You can consider it as God or the Spirit. Once it's experienced, you understand that there's elements of the Spirit in the entire spectrum of life. And the entire spectrum of life is part of this family. It's loved beyond comprehension because it belongs to it, and you belong to it, and it belongs to you. So in this higher state of consciousness, your higher self manifests as your perfect consort. You think, well, what's my guardian angel or my spirit or holy angel? What is it going to look like? Well, it's going to look like the, let's say, rarefied, ascended version of who you are in the opposite gender. That's what it looks like. At least that's what it looked like to me. So, and you could say that for me, it looked like Sopdet. It looked like Isis. It looked like Sophia. And in fact, when we go into these higher communities, let's say ascended communities, which let's just allow ourselves to say that they exist without having to try to justify why they exist. But let's say we ran into people from Venus, or we ran into people from the Pleiades, or people from, they are our closest relatives. Those two worlds are supposedly our closest relatives. What do you think they look like? They are breathtakingly gorgeous people, right? Because they're unifying their energies. And when they start unifying their energies, they start to become more objectively truthful, and they start to become the essence of who they were supposed to be. And so this isn't just a consciousness thing. This manifests on a physical plane. And so if you were to see people from these places, you'd think they were gods or goddesses or angels, because they're so beautiful. They manifest themselves in such a radiant way. So could you imagine from Sirius, which is even a higher octave than those places, if it wants to manifest, it manifests as a divine goddess. It manifests as Sophia, who is ultimately, and Isis, the ultimate goddess. Is they're supposed to be, that energy is the highest level of, or the highest octave of the divine feminine that we can connect to in this earthly life is Isis, Sophia. And so that's what we could connect to these energies. Right.
Feeling it. I'm just feeling it. It's just because that's how I travel. Like I have relationships with energy, we all do. But when I connect with the relational nature of everything, even beyond, I guess, the science and the physics and all of that, I feel these beings radiating the light of their truth in that integration field. And that is where we're headed in our own ways, at least in the next steps for some here in humanity. Go ahead, please.
Right. So Jesus is trying to tell people that this is going to be a hard path, right? Maybe not, it's going to be for everybody. And that later on, he tells his apostles that he will be crucified. And they were shocked by this. And this is where Peter says, oh, no, it won't happen to you. And that's where he just tells Peter, you're going to start my church. And then Peter says, oh, no, this won't happen to you, Lord. He says, get away from me, Satan. What's gotten into you, because that was the ego speaking. It was the ego speaking. It wasn't the spirit speaking through him.
Right.
So around this time, as he's trying to teach us, he's basically trying to say, know the truth, and the truth will free you. And then he's telling this to people. He said, you're receptive to my voice. You're receptive to my words, So understand that if you know my words, if you know the truth, you will be freed. You'll be freed from the bondage that we're all living in, which we're still living in now with a vengeance. It's all enslaving us. And then they got real indignant and mad at him. They said, well, what do you mean? We're born free people. We're never a slave. What are you, out of your mind? So you're a slave. You have been a slave. You're a slave within this reality. And unless you know the truth of who you really are,
you're
as a child of your divine parents, you'll always be a slave. And you will allow these forces, these draconian forces that are conditioning you through egotistical means to continuously enslave you within your egotistical viewpoints or your egotistical consciousness, which thinks it's free, and it's not. It's not free. It's not free will. It never has been free will. So very shortly after all of these amazing teachings are laid down to the people, 6 days later, he takes three of the apostles. It was Peter, John, and James, and he takes them up a mountain, and we believe that was Mount Tabor. which is about, it's a pretty good sized mountain, about 2,500 feet up. And they go up the mountain. You know, it's a good day's night. He takes them in the evening and go up there. So what happens on Mount Tabor? And now this was August 6th that he goes up there, and that's why it was celebrated. It was because the way that the scriptures lay it out, you have some idea when these dates were. So it's always celebrated on the 6th of August. But the spiritual things occur to us. And then what happens is there has to be some time that occurs after the let's say a significant vision or very powerful teaching. It has to percolate through your system for 7 days. There's always an echo 7 days later. Why is that, you may ask? Well, because that's what the week is structured on. It's structured on 7 days. Why is that important? Because every single day of the week is named after an energy in the solar system, right? So Sunday's Sunday, Monday's Moon Day, Tuesday's Mars, Wednesday's Mercury. And if you think about this in Latin or Spanish, it makes complete sense because that's where the names come from. Thursday's Jupiter. What's that?
Do you know about the seed of life?
I know of it, yes.
A friend of mine makes these. This is one made out of wood, but he makes them out of metal, and he makes sacred geometrical art. And what's interesting is he gave this to me just yesterday. You and I never know where we're going to travel when we have these podcasts, but it's interesting that you bring up the 7 days of creation, because the seed of life, each one of these rings represent, there's 7 overlapping rings, each to represent a single day in a week of creation.
Right. So So Friday is Venus, Saturday is Saturn, and Sunday's the sun. So we have to look at these from different perspectives in our consciousness. We have to process it. So after 7 days, we have maybe an echo of what happened or another event. So as they trudge out on the end of the 6th day, and they walk up this hill, this mountain, I would imagine sometime after midnight, the apostles are struck with a vision. And in the vision is the transfiguration of Jesus. He is up above them on a ridge or at the peak of the hill. And the heavens open up. And on one side of him is Moses, on another side of him is Elijah, and a cloud shows up. Remember we talked about in the last discussion, the Yahweh cloud, which was fire cloud, or as Rudolf Steiner talked about how he just interfaced with this fire cloud, which was within the spiritual realm. Well, that was there too, right? And so not only did that open up at that time, but Jesus is transfigured from probably a guy wearing some fairly worn out clothes to a man wearing white robes and energy that was flowing out of him. He became solar. He literally became solar. He transfigured himself. Now, what happened then, we can say, was a union between the soul, which is the divine feminine, which is within him, and the Logos energy, which we could call Yahweh, or we can call the sun, or call whatever you want. That portal opened up. Now we saw figures in the past and figures that were very prominent within the human culture there, very prominent souls. We can get into the history of who Elijah was and who Moses was, but they were very powerful souls. And you saw the presence of the divine Father and Yahweh's presence in that thundercloud that was there, or whatever it was. And here Jesus was in a timeless state. And guess who else was present? Sirius, Isis, Sophia, because of the celestial alignments of that date. She was there also. So the transfiguration occurs briefly. Briefly it occurs. So the apostles are freaked out, and they hide, and Jesus comes to them and says, "Don't worry, it's okay," and so that event ends. Now, what's also interesting is that they descend the mountain, and then I don't know if it's immediately after that or 7 days later, because he supposedly goes to Jerusalem, does some stuff, and later on, they're back on the road and they encounter a tree. And this is a very strange story. And it's something that people aren't going to be happy about. But they encounter a tree, and a tree is called a Bodhi tree, a Bodhi tree. It's a Bodhi tree. It's a giant tree that it produces figs. And this is the tree that the Buddha sat underneath and achieved enlightenment. Now, they saw the tree and they go out all excited. Oh, you know, we're hungry and we need to rest and all. So they ran over to the tree, and the tree had no fruit on the tree. It was not bearing fruit. Jesus does something extremely weird. He curses the tree. He says, from now on, you will never be able to produce fruit again.
Wow.
Right. So some people say, well, he was acting out of spite. No, he wasn't. And so what he was doing, he was just saying that there's only one way to consciousness, to the consciousness that we are seeking to achieve. It's through the transfiguration. It's through the process that we have to go through, right? It's in the same archetype as what he went through. And he goes on to tell us later on that those who go through this, those who understand what I'm doing, will go on to do greater things than I've accomplished. But we're trying to get to a dimensional state that is what we call the 5D dimensional state, Christed consciousness. I mean, listen, you can't get to Christed consciousness or unity consciousness without going through the process that the man articulated, or this person articulated for us to get to. And so that's really unfortunate, not unfortunately, but that's what we have to go through. And so, you know, I don't want to criticize other religions or beliefs, but in many of those religions and beliefs, they focus on the extreme positive side of things. And, you know, and this was the idea, is that you could meditate your way, or you could, you know, you could purify your way to a higher state of consciousness. The idea being that this world was corrupted. And so instead of
uncorrupting it and having to clear it all out,
what you do is you ascend off of it. You know, you go through these different stages in your life, which is one of the justifications for caste systems, really, is that, you know, this is a young soul, so this person's going to live down here, and this is a not so young soul, this person belongs into this caste, and so on, until you get to the last stage where you're kind of like a priest caste, and then you ascend out of the world. Well, there's a really interesting story that's behind that. And I don't know if I want to go into all the details of it, but the Essenes lived that way. They created their own, they were very close to Buddhism. It's very much the same type of not religion, but let's say a spiritual viewpoint. And then if you were a Essene person, you couldn't walk through certain doors in Jerusalem. There had to be special doors for you that you could only walk through. They had certain symbols on them. The idea is that they didn't, with those symbols on it, the demonic spirits, the evil spirits couldn't go through those doors. But you could. You can go through those doors as in a scene. And so one of the stories that Rudolf Steiner conveyed was he saw this. Jesus saw this. Steiner saw it in the Akashic records as he was reading it. And he saw Jesus in this perspective. And Jesus was wrestling with, well, you know, he was born into the Essene community, but was not actually an Essene. He had to create a different form of consciousness, of initiation. Which so the idea, what he saw, and this is what Steiner conveys, is that what he saw was Lucifer and Satan not being able to get through the door that the Essenes had created. So instead of getting through the door, they just went through the other doors. And so what he saw was that by ignoring or shutting yourself out, or cutting or isolating yourself off from the darkness. You're not integrating it. You're not alchemizing it.
No.
What you're doing is you're driving it out of your reality sense, and it's just attacking, or it's just manifesting itself to those who are less vulnerable. And so he said that way is the wrong way. So what we actually have in this process, which is a process that was articulated by Jesus in the Lord's Prayer, is that we're not trying to ascend out of the universe or out of the world. We're trying to ascend the world, right? The world has to be ascended. So this whole idea of integration, this whole idea of forgiveness, of balancing karma, all these other things are extremely important. But this is the path that we're supposed to be taking, which is a different path. It's one of integrating of your darkness and confronting and pointing out and shining the light on these dark entities. So there, maybe it's not for everybody, but there's definitely people who are here that are destined to do these things. They're here to point these things out, and you're here to help us to integrate these energies within ourselves and help us to ascend beyond that.
You know what?
So transfiguration plays a huge part in all of this.
I'm so, I mean, I love what you're sharing, and I'm so I don't know if the word is enamored, but I'm experiencing everything that you're saying. And I hope our listeners are too, for those that can hang in a deeper exploration of things like this with us. And that the word of transfiguration, I can't say that that's a word that rolls off my tongue. I don't even think, I see it much in my transmissions, probably because I haven't really focused on that, right? But transcendence and all these things. But you're also validating something for me, because some of us are prepared, like you say, not all of us, but some of us are these transmuters or transfigurers or transcenders, alchemizers, right? Chemists that know how to come into this integration. We've prepared for lifetimes in many ways to be able to be this at this time. And what's interesting is I'm somebody that my whole life, even before I knew I could channel, I could see in people the greatest light, which people love that. When you're like, oh, you have this beautiful gift. Who doesn't want to just drink that in? You know what else I have? Is the ability to see people's greatest darkness. Do you know how many people cringe away and like, no, I don't think we need to have lunch, right? I don't think we need to have this visit or conversation or whatever. And so that is so also the human ego that's like, okay, I like this part of the conversation. No, I don't like this part of the conversation. And they don't want the wholeness of it. They just want the pieces and the compartments that they want. And they don't want to know about the parts of themselves that make them uncomfortable. And I just want to add, when I see people's greatest light and I see people's greatest darkness, and I'm talking about, I see myself the same way. I can see myself in my greatest light, and I can see myself in my greatest darkness. And it's interesting because I'm very comfortable with all of this. And no matter what the greatest light and the greatest darkness is, I can see people for the most part, and there's no judgment. It's just, these are frequencies in our energy field that are readable to those of us that have the language or that have the sight or the understanding. And it's the most beautiful thing when people can tap into the greater shadow elements, and they themselves can alchemize and go through this transfiguration process that happens for those who are ready and hear that call, because it becomes a wholeness, and you aren't just trying to clear away or shove it away or, chop it off or, exercise it, exile it from your consciousness. It becomes a mended and valued and integrated and empowered part of you, because there's wisdom and gifts in all of it. And there are not always people who are able to go the distance in what the extreme polarity that we have, some of us have the ability to see and perceive. But that's where the healing is. That is where the healing is when you can see the two wolves, and you can know the two wolves and know that both have things and lessons they're teaching you, and you can find your way to center. That's also in the Two Wolves story, similar to me, is like the 0 point or the transfiguration of the Christ, that some of us are on this path. And I think we will all be called. You're saying when Christ said this to his apostles and disciples, he wasn't saying it to just them. He knew that that was going to get passed on, and everybody has to go through this, but no one's immune to that process. Right? Yes. Right.
Right.
But
So
many
it's-
people try and go around it or above it, or positive thinking intention their way through it. But I mentioned rubber banding because I feel that they just rubber band themselves somewhere in their journey back to what they didn't deal with before. And maybe they're more ready. Right. And I've had my own experience of that. Okay, I'll pass on that one. Oh no, but it comes back. Right.
Right.
It comes back. Yeah.
So the if we are under different circumstances, maybe it'll work. If left completely alone to our own accord, and if we were not manipulated as a planet, it would probably have taken us 10 times longer to get to where we needed to go in a far less violent fashion. But unfortunately, we were manipulated. And so this is the grand experiment, which is occurring right now. And so Gaia is moving into it allegedly is in 5 density. It's 5th density. It's in Christed consciousness. If you were to talk to the Pleiadians, or maybe even the Venusians, I suspect they would be very Christ-like people. I don't think there'd be anyone within their society that wouldn't be. Because they allegedly that anytime they make a decision on a global decision, it's almost a unanimous decision based on their level of objectivity within their consciousness that they hold. So
it's a collective vote. Mm-hmm.
It's a collective vote. So this is an interesting idea that when they climbed up Mount Tabor and it went through that portal, right? That portal emerges. It didn't just transfigure Christ or Jesus into Christ, Logos. It transfigured the mountain.
Oh, wow.
So this is interesting because it went from Mount Tabor. In fact, no one even knows what mountain it is, but if you go to that part of the world, there's only one mount. And there is. You must have climbed that one. So there's a lot of references within the scriptures of a place called Mount Zion. Mount Zion. Now there, in that part of the world, there's a Mount Zion, in Utah, but that was not the place we were talking about. Mount Zion. And so that is a mythical place. That is an ascended place in the New Jerusalem. That is in a higher density state of consciousness. That's within Christed consciousness, 5th density consciousness, where the world is ascending. So this is interesting. So not only did Jesus transfigure, but the Mount transfigures. And then if you read Revelations, it's kind of mind-blowing that in Revelations, they talk about Christ as 2 things. They talk about, actually very interesting. Jesus says that that he is from the house of David, or he's offspring of David, or he's a lineage is from David. And the other thing he says it's very interesting is that his origin is from the morning star. His origin is from the morning star. Now, what's the morning star? That's Venus. So some people feel that his origins are from that planet.
Venusian.
It makes some sense when you look into it, which is also tied to the Pleiadians. There's an axis that exists between Earth, Venus, and the Pleiades. That's why we're so strongly considered within those groups.
Wow.
There's also something that is within the esoteric community that understands that human initiation can only occur through the sphere of Venus. So the other thing that's kind of mind-blowing is when you look at the depiction of Isis Sophia in the manifestation of Sopdet, the goddess that the Egyptians honored. Above her head is a 5-pointed star or a pentagram upright, which represents Venus. And that's considered her child. So, I mean, you see all of these really weird connections that are there, which points to this love planet, this planet of love. And so we're there, the thought is that from this perspective, we're being taught. Now, we're being taught through these energies. So Jesus says, well, you know, I'm part of the house of David, or I'm a son or house of David. So check this out. This is what David has to say. David, this is Psalm 19.
Okay.
So this is David singing it. Now, I don't know if he wrote it, and there in itself is an interesting esoteric mystery, because some of the Psalms are thought to have been written by the soul that became Jesus, the Zarathustra soul. At one time during that time was a very wise person, gifted person, a loving person who wrote these poetic, you know, incantations to God, right? Wow. So listen to this, and this is going to be interesting. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Okay, so this is why people throw the Bible away, because it's just one giant paradox.
Right.
But as Carl Jung would say, when you find a paradox, you are right on top of the truth.
Wow.
Truth is paradoxical from a higher perspective. From a lower perspective, it's all linear. It's supposed to be linear. But from a higher perspective, it's paradoxical. So what is this in reference to? You know, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the works of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. This is the heavens. This is the heavens speaking to us. And this is the earth speaking to us. Divine masculine, our divine Father is in heaven. He's pouring down the glory of that realm and proclaiming the words of his hands. And the divine feminine is the earth, the mother nature. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. So what this is, and then it goes into this paradox. There is no speech. They use no words. So this is something that we've been saying for quite a while.
Yes.
Now, is that you have to develop your super sensibilities,
yes,
your capacities to sense what your heart is feeling. That has no words. This is our soul's speech, right? Now, this is a reference to the astrology. This is a reference to the zodiac. And as it turns out, Zion means zodiac in Hebrew.
Wow.
So Mount Zion, the realm of Zion, these are people. Now, I wrote this and I said, well, will we be living in the heavens? I honestly can't answer that. But I can tell you this, the heavens will live within you.
Yes.
Right? So that's what these references are. These are references to becoming acclimated to the words of the divine, both from the heavens and also from the earth. Right? And so this is what we're developing. We're developing our capacities to understand this. And when we start reading the signs, whether that's through our visions, whether that's through our synchronicities, or whether that's within the heavens around us, this is how we become acclimated to this truth. Now, what's really interesting is that there is some interesting references, and I don't want to get into too much of this, but on that mountain, there was on the Mount Zion, where in Revelations, John's vision, where Jesus is saying, I am a child, or my lineage is from David. David was the one who said this psalm. And also it's from Venus, the morning star. On that mount were 144,000 souls who had his name written on their foreheads and within their hearts, you see. And so this is the idea that the soul speech, it's not the man, it's not the person, it's Christed consciousness. Yes. You have to understand they're the same thing. They're the same. That's he was like Sirius, the star, manifesting Isis Sophia on the physical plane. So here he was, a man who became the vessel for the logos, a much more powerful, but it's the truth. And so now we're manifesting it, through not just one person, but there's many other souls who are connecting to this consciousness. Now, I don't know where 144,000 comes from. Rudolf Steiner wrote a beautiful essay about this, and he was saying that was a code for the lives that a person lived, and that it was in numerology, that was what it represented, that those who were being prepared for this coming of Christed consciousness, those were the ones who were going to be prepared for it. So it might not actually be a number of 144,000. I certainly hope there's a hell of a lot more than 144,000, or we're in trouble. But that was the idea. Now, I can keep going if you want. We want to take a break or make some comments, or
I think a number of people who would be listening to this, and me too included, I have always felt a connection with 144,000, whether it was, the 12 disciples have 12 counterparts, and 12 times 12 is 144, and their descendants or their teachings. Some people believe it was, star races that make up the 144,000, where they were sent through the atmosphere and through time to come to this planet. I'm sure you're going to enlighten us, or I don't know if you're going to talk about
there's many different myths of it. Theosophy teaches that they came from Venus. 144,000 came from Venus. There's a kind of like a world king named Sanat Kumara, that Jesus is one of the disciples, part of all this. I don't know. I can't say that. Steiner didn't really talk that much about it. All I can say is that, that's ancient history. And I also wrote an essay about this years ago, talking about, because this is where the idea of the twin flames come from, and that we bifurcate our souls. And well, if you bifurcate our souls once, you can bifurcate it again and again and again and again and again. So there may be a magnitude more than just 144,000 souls. So we really don't know about that. But that's, I think, the strongest mythologies, or what the mythologies really suggest, is that might have come from that lineage. I don't know, right? But what's interesting is Transfiguration and where that plays into all of this. So
okay,
I'm going to go for it. I'm going to keep going.
Keep going.
All right. So check this out. All right, check this out.
Come on.
You said it, and that's what's wiping me out. So in your second to last transmission, and I listened to the Marinades, and I said, there's a lot of information there, but did you pick this up? So you said that what is so exceptional about the Lion's portal and the lion frequency now at this time? This is a question. So what is so exceptional about the Lion's portal and this lion frequency at this time? And then you answer, lion is one of the 4 core harbingers of peace being restored on your world at this time. Why? What do you mean 4? What are the other 3?
I don't know.
Right.
Good point.
This is powerful. I read this and I'm like, oh, wow. They must be talking to me at night or something. I actually had visions, and I think many of us have, being in classrooms and being in groups. And I don't really remember but I actually do. And many times I'm talking and I'm speaking, And I'm going, yeah, that's what I would say in real life anyway. So, I mean, maybe I'm bringing myself up to that level. I don't know.
Yes.
But the 4 core harbingers of peace, now that's really mind blowing. Right? So the lion is extremely important. And so we talked about the crucifixion.
Yes.
And so we talked about, as we were going into the summer solstice, we talked about how these energies were how they were two oppositions, and they were on a fixed cross. And so the fixed cross, all right? So what are the signs of the fixed cross? And I think that's what this is in reference to, the 4 core harbingers of peace. So I think we're going to have some kind of interesting experience. This was the first, and I think probably the most important, because, anytime we're learning something, it's always the first lessons and are the most visceral and powerful lessons. And we learn most effectively through imitation, through mentoring and through role modeling. And so the best possible way we can learn is through the energies of Leo, of the lion. It's in our hearts, right? So this is the most visceral and powerful of all of the energies. So it's fixed to the middle of the season. And this is right around 8/8. So this is the portal. So this is amazing. We're connected to this lion energy. But what comes next? And what comes next, and I looked this up because I wanted to see, I wanted to see what the fall season is going to bring us, the fall equinox. What will that bring? Because at that moment, I think it's the 22nd. It's 22nd of September. What's the signature of that season going to be? And it's quite astounding. It's very amazing.
Interesting.
So the second harbinger, in my opinion, is Scorpio.
Okay.
Because that's the next fixed sign.
Okay.
In Scorpio is Venus. And so I'm not going to get into all that because I want to work those details out better. I want to feel it more.
We'll do it again. We'll meet again once this becomes clearer.
But Scorpio is extraordinarily important. It's important for a number of reasons. But if you look at how the human consciousness ascends, it goes through lower levels of ascension until we get to the 7th sign. And the 7th sign of the zodiac is Scorpio.
Oh, wow.
That also corresponds to the years that we live. Every 7 years, there's a major transformation or transfiguration of your consciousness. This is, you were at a really good school that understood this, they would follow this principle. Trying to teach a child to read too early, it's useless. Trying to teach a child advanced mathematics at a certain age, it's useless because ego isn't developed yet. They don't understand this. But it never ends. It continues on and on and on and on 7-year cycles. So it's towards your spiritual enlightenment. And we go through this. So really, we don't really become psychologically matured or adults until we're like 35 to 42 years old.
Right.
And that's just the way the consciousness works. This has something to do with the cycles of Chiron. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but Chiron is extremely important in all this. But it also ties into the Beatitudes. And Beatitudes, at the 7th Beatitude, you're kind of like, you're kind of like at the top of your game. You're kind of maturing. But this is where we hit the midlife crisis the hardest, is usually right around 49 years old, 50 years old. And so this is what we said would be the 7th year, 7th cycle. Now, what happens in a midlife crisis? We either divorce our spouse, we buy a car that's, that reminds us of our youth if you're a guy, and you start dating women that are far too young for you to handle. So you go back in time. You go back to your past, and you live your egotistical desires. Or you realize that that was just an illusion, and every life is fleeting. And when you decide, I'm going to look for the answer within myself, and I'm going to ascend. Now, what's really interesting about Scorpio, because this is what it all happens in that time frame of Scorpio. The Scorpion is a lower octave of something greater. So the way that the story goes is that in the heavens, when the earth was in a higher state of ascension, that part of the heavens was not represented by a scorpion. It was represented by an eagle or a bird. So when the world fell, that part of the heavens was transfigured into a lower perspective. The mythology that's associated with it has to do with Orion. The scorpion is at the heels of Orion. Now, also a lot of bad stuff comes out of Orion. Maybe some good stuff comes out of Orion, but Orion is really the constellation of human dominance. This is where a lot of the dark energies and the dark, draconian energies all are supposed to come from Orion.
Right.
And so Orion was not slighted. I think there was something involved within Orion. I don't know if his girlfriend was accidentally killed or something like that. But Orion, there was something that happened that really got Orion infuriated. So Orion was going to come down into the earth and annihilate it. Yeah, that was the story. So what the gods did was they placed the scorpion as an assassin at the heels of Orion to keep Orion at bay. So we forgot before let's say the consciousness of human consciousness descended into the scorpion's consciousness, which was conflict and domination. What was there before it? And what was there before it was an eagle.
Wow.
So, right. So what this represents is a point. Now we're talking about this within the year cycle as another harbinger of peace. And it'll be the fixed sign of the second season since the crucifixion was marked. And so what we will be offered at that point, I think, and especially at the onset of the fall on the 22nd of September, is an opportunity for us to either take the lower path of conflict or to ascend. And when we ascend, we're transfiguring ourselves from a scorpion to an eagle. The phoenix is associated with this also, but I would like to think of ourselves as transfiguring ourselves into a new entity,
Yes.
into a higher octave, a greater octave. And in that state of consciousness, that is represented by the bird, the avian energies. And the avian energies are holy energies. And that actually represents egotistical energies, ego energies. But you know what? Ego isn't bad. Ego is God's gift. If more people use their ego wisely, they wouldn't be lining up to get poisonous vaccinations or listening to lies and deceptions that are hell-bent on destroying their life.
Right.
The ego was given to us, forethought was given to us by Prometheus. It's a Promethean energy. And that energy could be used for destruction, or it could be used for peace. It could be used for ascension. And it's those that are going to take this higher path, this higher Promethean path. And you know what? The gods punished for Prometheus for giving us this forethought. And Chiron was punished for giving us this forethought. And that's an amazing story. I don't want to get into too much. But I think that's the second harbinger of peace that we will be experiencing. The third harbinger of peace will be the Aquarians, will be in Aquarius, and that is the spiritual man, or that is the Holy Spirit. And the fourth harbinger of peace will be the bull, will be Taurus. And I think that is what this is being referred to. And every one of these are marking they call it the genius or the Geni. The 4 pillars of human existence were based on these energies. So all the ancient people said there were 4 pillars. They represented the 4 directions of the earth, but these were also angelic beings.
Yes.
And when Ezekiel saw the vision, that's what he saw. He saw an angel manifesting in 4 different angels or 4 different ways. He saw the lion, he saw a bull, he saw an eagle, which was the transfigured scorpion, and then he saw the Aquarian human being or the Aquarian man, the water bearer, the spiritual bearer. He saw all those things. Yeah.
Wow, it's so, it's so interesting how they mentioned the one. I wasn't thinking what the other 3 were. So, a lot of times it's not just what you're given, but it's what you're able to see of asking the other questions, right? There's a riddle within the gift that they're giving you, right? To go seeking, and you have reclaimed that. And we all are benefiting from that. And, it's interesting as you were talking about, I really was listening to the second harbinger in the September, and you said the September, maybe 22nd, there on the equinox. And you talked about the Scorpio, and you talk about in its, I don't know what that energy is, or the harbinger in its inverted form is the Scorpio, right? But in its transfigured form is the eagle. And I think about the scorpion with the stinger on its back, right? And it's interesting because I just had this experience over the last few days. We've had some kind of yellow jackets have bred or something, but they're in our screen and porch, yellow jackets, and they can get feisty. They're the ones that can smell fear. If you turn and run from several of them, they'll bring all their siblings with them, right? Yes. And I have them on my porch, which is also my sanctuary, where I live. And so, but what's interesting is they're kind of sluggish. They're sluggish yellow jackets. They don't have the potency that they once had. And I've been paying attention to that because I've been feeling there's something here with me in these yellow jackets. There's a message. And I have a slight allergy to stings, right? But I get them with a cup and a cardboard, like a coaster. I use like a paper kind of cardboard coaster, and I'm collecting all of them and I'm sending them out my porch door, and they're flying, right? So they're the stinging energy, which reminds me of the scorpion you're talking about coming up, and the transfiguration. And somebody who has an allergy to these things, if just one of them gets me, it's not going to be pleasant. And yet I'm watching myself each time, and there's many of them, but I'm getting them one by one out, and I clear the porch and then more appear. And I know that there's some kind of transfiguration process, and you may have just solved the puzzle of my porch. Also, what's going on here? But I could feel that. Isn't it amazing that I'm somebody who could, in a lower version of myself, go into fear about what is here in my experience with these yellow jackets? And yet with faith and neutrality, I'm taking them one by one and setting them free, which is also somehow releasing me from the sting and any other stings of fear that I might be carrying in my field. And I think also September, as we call in this lion energy, but we're working with this energy that you have so aptly brought into our consciousness in this conversation, just amazing. I think there are things that could sting all of us in the next, whatever it is, 2, 4, 5 weeks this is, right? And it can either take us down into this path of destruction, and we say mired in the trap and the prison planet that we've been in for all this time, or we can transfigure that fear of what could sting us, what could trigger us, what could take us down more into the old cycles that we know so well, instead of flying free. And so even me, I feel like I'm transfiguring that stinging energy, like the scorpion, and I feel that eagle. I'm very connected to the hawk too. So this bird energy and taking flight and setting ourselves free too. I think there's a freedom of like that if we can do the work and not turn away and just kind of, in a way, I'm not saying that we don't all have positive intentions, but I don't know that we can just positive energy our way even with the yellow jackets, I am sending them good intentions, but I also know that I'm doing the work. I at this point can't just sort of, what is that? Alchemize. Like I can't just like in my consciousness send them outside my porch with my mind, right? I do need the cup and the cardboard, which represents to me the work. We have to be willing to take the things that can sting us, that can really trigger us or take us spiraling downward. And we have to be the agent, the instrument that is alchemizing. We have to be the chemist that we are. And so let me go to the third and fourth, where you talked about the bull and the fourth. Is that take us to like April?
No, go ahead. What?
Because I just feel the energy of Easter too somehow, and also the new birth. So is that also part of things? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Interesting though, I wanted to make one quick comment that how interesting is it that the scorpion is associated with poison injections?
Oh, isn't it interesting? Right?
Isn't it interesting?
It is very interesting.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? So what's really interesting about these archetypes or these celestial symbols is that each one represents an element of the human body. Now, the human body, within the human body, there are 4 bodies. This is alchemy. This is ancient healing. It's always been represented this way. So the one physical body exists and 3 energetic bodies exist. So if we wanted to start when this probably happens every year, on these cycles.
Right.
But if we wanted to think about what body the lion represents and what body does the eagle represent, and what body does the man represent, and what body does the bull represent, we should talk about that, because I think this is a process of purification of all 4 bodies. Right? So you have to purify all 4 bodies, or you have to crucify all bodies, or you have to transfigure all 4 bodies. So I think the most important one is the lion. And the reason is the lion is associated with the etheric body. The lion is the fire symbol. It's a fire symbol.
Right.
And so it's a fire symbol. And so that is our love connection. That is our spiritual connection. That is the essence. That's our libido. It's our love. It's our drive. It's love energy.
Yes.
So the lion, it's heart based. It's not really heart based, and it can be. So I don't want to get people confused, because it is heart based.
Yeah.
For sure, it's heart based. But in some of the ways that the physiology or the machinations or of how these bodies integrate themselves, it's actually associated with the liver. And the liver is like your solar plexus. It's where your real strength is at. But also keep in mind that your core chakras, or your center energies, kind of oscillate between the heart and the solar plexus. I would say that it's dead center between those two was where it's at. So that's really where it's at. It's this solar plexus, heroic, powerful energy, right?
Right.
It's kind of like amalgamation of both, or a unification of both. So that's what that energy is. This is what we're being called to do, to stand up now and stand up for ourselves and stand up for humanity. This is extremely important times.
And I didn't say it before, but standing up for ourselves and seeking truth, it's that truth that will set us free.
Yes.
And without seeking the truth, we're just in the wheel, right?
Yes. You're literally consenting to go back into the cage, or staying in the cage.
Correct.
Or the wheel of karma, or call it whatever you want. and hoping for the best, because I don't want to go through a crucifixion. I don't want to go through hardship. So I'll just sit in the back seat and I'll just go wherever the hell this bus is going, even though it's going off the end of a cliff, into probably another dimensional world where it will look nothing like Earth. Check this out. One other mythologies that I read was that you will be reincarnated into a third density realm. But you know what you'll be incarnated as? An octopus.
Oh, gosh.
In a third density reality. That's what you're choosing. So anyway, and maybe not, I don't know. It was just a myth. There it is. You want to take that chance, go right ahead. I'd rather stay human, personally. But so that's, I think, in the Law of One. It's actually in the Law of One, I think, where that's written. So
Wow.
In the next stage, or this other stage, which can be confusing because you have the two archetypes. One is a scorpion, and one of them is the eagle. The eagle is transfigured. It's transfigured scorpion energy. So, but the scorpion energy is water energy. Scorpion's a water sign. So that is more emotional. So now we're going into our emotional bodies. And quite frankly, the heart is really the center of the astral energies regarding that. So it's beautiful, though, that we can ascend it, we can transfigure it from an imprisoned heart that we don't really understand, into an enlightened heart, a heart that is living within the presence of its higher self. It's enlightened. It's a higher heart.
Exactly.
Heart, right? We were told that we cannot enter the realm of heaven. And this was an old Egyptian parable, or not parable, but the mythology is that Ra's wife, the god Ra, his wife was Mahat. She was a goddess. She was very much like Saptit. She held the scales of justice, or she presided over the scales of justice. And in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven, your heart could not weigh more than or had to weigh the same as a feather. Right. So if you did not have an enlightened heart, you couldn't enter into the kingdom of heaven. Interesting that's an avian symbol, isn't it? And Ra is an avian god. And so it all converges at this point. But this is insane. This is crazy, beautiful stuff, right?
You know, one of my main guides that I don't talk about in the Arcturian Collective is Earth Feather, right? Earth Feather. That's that same energy of your heart has to be the same weight, equal to.
Yes, can't weigh any more than a feather. You're not going to be able. So you have to enlighten your heart, and that's really, I think, what this. Right, if you see where the alignments are at, you're just not going to. I mean, I could go. I don't want to go into the details of it, but it really will be that. It really will be choices that will have to be made, and we're going to be forced. We're being forced into choices now, and whether we want to or not, we're being forced into these choices. And so this will be a very important time, and it'll probably come to fruition. Like things are coming to fruition now in the season, not at the beginning, but in the middle. In the middle of this season, there is a major holiday. We talked about it last year, which is Michaelmas. And that will play a huge part in all of this. Just like in the middle of this season, in the middle of the summer season, we're dealing really with the Lion's Gate energy, the portal, the transfiguration. Right. We'll be seeing Michaelmas, and it'll be an amazing time. It'll be a trying time for us. And we'll go over this. We'll talk about this.
Yes, I'd like to.
But that's what the transfiguration, the season's going to be more about this transfiguration energy occurring and transforming the scorpion, the assassin, the eye for an eye kind of mentality, into an enlightened state of consciousness. The third state is associated with Aquarius, and that is in the, let's say, in this parameter that we're talking about, would be associated with ego. but it wouldn't be, it would be enlightened ego. It would be Promethean ego. It would be God-given ego.
Right.
Ego really is the essence of who you are. That's who you are. So this is another process of purification that we'll have to go through in the egotistical body. And then the final state. So you've purified the lowest level of consciousness, which is lion, which is etheric. You know, how can I describe it? You're not consciously aware of your etheric consciousness because it's literally gut centered. So when you have a gut feeling,
Oh, wow.
the organ of intelligence is hepatic or liver. It's really the entire immune system, and your whole immunity is connected to this spiritual presence, this spiritual power. If your spiritual energy is weakened, which they're trying to do, you will be a sick person. If your spiritual energy is empowered, and if you're feeling the love that's coming from the light of the creator of the creation, then you're going to be a healthy, strong individual. So that's where the consciousness exists. It exists within that state. It's a very deep state. I've experienced it in very deep, profound dreams when your body is healing in those states. And I can feel it. You can feel it. It's experienced as an intuition, as a gut feeling.
Yes.
Now, in the second state, where we're looking at, which is this second harbinger of peace, which is the enlightened heart, right? That is all about heart-based feelings. It's about love, but I think the love really exists in the etheric plane. So although we feel the love when our heart becomes enlightened, because it's one stage closer and it's feeding off that love, and it just feels it, but it's not the source. The source of the love is from the lion. It's from the fire. It's from the logos. It's the heart. So what we're doing is we're purifying now in that second state. We're purifying the heart. We're purifying the heart. In the next stage, which is going to be around the Christmas time, the winter solstice,
Right.
it will purify the mind. It'll purify it'll burn away, or hopefully, the little ego, and it'll help the big ego to manifest and to realign itself in a proper configuration, which is you can't survive without Promethean forethought. But you can't let that rule you. It is there to be used as a tool. It's your God-given talents, but it's there to be inspired and led by your higher self. And so we'll be getting to that stage. I haven't looked at the astrology of that. Now, once we purify the energetics, we will come to the point of the bull. And the bull is Taurus, and that's an earth sign. That represents the physical body. And so possibly the full transfiguration will not happen until we get to the new rebirth, which will be in the time of Easter, the rebirth of the body, but everything, hopefully, through this yearly process of suffering and great challenges, we will get to that point where we hopefully will have seen a new path and start to resonate with a new path, and a transfigured, not just soul, everything is, you can transfer spirit, soul, everything. It's being transfigured. We're melding into a new transformation. Now, will the ascension happen on the Easter? I don't know. I mean, I think it's just a process, a cyclical process. We keep spiraling through it. But now we're aware of what's going on. And quite frankly, I think these globalists have run out of time, or are running out of time, which is why their acts are so ridiculously desperate. Because if you just waited long enough, get off the merry-go-round. So I don't work for 6 months. So I don't work for a year. Who freaking cares? That'll be the best time of your life, quite frankly. Get in your car and drive around the country and see it. Who cares? Because you know what? The whole thing is going to collapse anyway. And within a year or a year and a half or 2 years, they're going to be looking for qualified people to come work for them. And guess what? You won't need a freaking shot, because they won't care, because they just need people to work. That's how it's going to work out. God will support you. The Spirit will support us. And maybe you don't want the crappy job anymore because you found something better. You found a new community of people, a new purpose. So what?
Right.
So what? This whole thing is just, it's contrived. It's playing on that whole Hegelian dialectic that I talked about, crisis, reaction, solution. My God, the sky is falling. We got to do something immediately. And they got a remedy they're going to sell you. But I'll tell you what, it's an absolute mistake to go down that path unless you want to have that experience.
Right.
Because,
And you want to get on the bus.
I can't convince you how evil and corrupt these entities are. You're going to have to learn that yourself. Get on the bus and watch it drive over the cliff with you in the back, straight down 500 feet crash into the rocks right at the side of the ocean. That's what it's going to do.
People have to experience this, and people like you, when you talk about the cathars, Paul, and I know my own deep pain from Lemuria and those experiences, we've had some of those cataclysmic incinerating type experiences inside ourselves that we recognize the signs. We have the soul sight to see it because we've been on buses like that before.
Right.
And we say, I'm not getting on that bus because I know where that bus goes, right? But some people are new to the bus and new to the transportation schedule, and they've got their ticket and they say, oh, I'm getting on a bus and I'm going somewhere fabulous. They just don't know. And, we can make light of this, or it's heavy stuff too. It is very heavy. But what I like, it's incredibly heavy. And what we're talking about, there's going to be highs and there's going to be heaviness. There's no question in what we've got to go through as individuals and as a collective. But what I also love is those of us that are awake that say, I'll take the 6 months. I'll take the 3 months. I'll create a school together. The people who are awake and not getting on the bus, we may be ones who create something totally different, that once the people are coming up for air again in their own ways, we'll be there and we'll say, oh, it's so good. I'm glad you returned, in their own way, in whatever form that is. We will continue to share what we already know, and we will be guides and almost, compasses in the journey for those that have interest. And so sometimes the greatest creativity is birthed when you're squeezed out of something that is dying. It's a cycle of us that is leaving. And we know to let that leave because we are ready for this integrated being that you're talking about, that to me is a new quantum consciousness. We've gone to the next level. And there was something else I think you referenced when you even talked about Zion. There's these places that are like etheric places. I've even heard the Lemuria. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but the physical civilization and land mass and all of that went under the sea, that there's a fifth dimensional Lemuria that never left us. It's right there. And we just lost our ability to see it. It ascended, but some of us were caught behind the veils and couldn't perceive it. So we felt this great loss and this great grief. The cathars, we felt this great loss and great grief. But many of us are ascending to be in that consciousness with family that we've longed to re-meet again. And I think those of us that can hold that vibration and hold that belief system and hold that knowing, it's more than belief. You've talked about that. It's more than belief. It's a knowing. We're anchoring the new consciousness for those that aren't yet. They have to get on the buses. They might do a couple loops. We're going to keep holding this consciousness because that's what's ours to do, because that is us. I'm not separate from what this consciousness is that you're talking about. I am one with that quantum consciousness, and it is leading me forward, and it will lead me through what we're talking about, the Lion's Gate energies, the September frequencies. We've got the Transfiguration that's going to be taking place, the winter solstice, and into the Easter's new birth. And ascension is something that is happening along the way, but our transfiguration is perhaps the most important thing that gives rise to the ascension that happens on a collective level. And so the ascension isn't something out there, it's actually happening in here, but it is an active process. And I love when we can explore these things because not everybody goes deep into these. There's so many things you and I can portal into. And I always appreciate the people who spend time with us, who have the stomach, who have the strength, that's coming from all this other fortification, and that want to go there too, because they feel a resonance, at least to know about it, but maybe also to be participants in where we're going in this strength, that we are being fortified by an otherworldly energy. And that was in the most recent transmission. In the first paragraph, the guides were talking about, when they were talking about, you are alchemists, but you are all chemists. But they're talking about, we're going to be shining in this unity consciousness that shines brighter and brighter and brighter, like a beacon of perfection and resplendence that is otherworldly, because you are otherworldly too. This is that Zion energy. This is that Lemurian frequency. This is this otherworldly consciousness. And only if you've been cultivating more of these skills, or you just begin today, there's so much that we can do, that we can leap in our consciousness if we're willing to open and be that spiritual warrior and go through the transfiguration, which, can be incinerating. There's fire. The element of fire is in this time.
Right. Keep in mind that if you are just new to all of this information, there's millions of us who know this information that can't give it away. So the most beautiful thing that you could do for those who are going through, or are moving through the path of ascension, is to allow those who are moving forward to share that information with you.
Yes.
That is really our purpose in life. The way that this is explained is this. I can never have gotten to where I am at this point, and Marie could have never gotten to where she is at this point, without the grace of others, the grace of other worlds, the grace of the masters who taught us, the grace of those human beings who came before us. We cannot ascend without that. And that's only given to us through grace, through pure love, through unconditional love. Now, I can't pay them back. We can't pay them back. The only way we can do that is to find channels for the knowledge that we have, and invest that within those souls that are willing to listen, willing to utilize that information for themselves. We cannot convey to you what we know, but we can inspire you to look for yourself, or we can help to catalyze processes that must happen within your soul to demonstrate to you that this indeed is the truth. And this can only be done through your own experience. And that's the only way that can happen. I had a very interesting dream. I don't know if I told you this, maybe I did, but this was a dream where I was in a church, and my wife and I were walking into a church, and we were waiting in line, and I remember looking at my wife going, gee, am I dressed well enough? I think I am, but I'm looking at all these people in fine garments, and I'm okay. So we walk into the church as the sermon is beginning, and they usher us in, and then they told us to go down the aisle. And as we started moving down the aisle, it started to descend, going down to a lower level. And then they were ushering us on like a large floor through a portal into another room, where you weren't going to hardly hear anything that was going to be said by this priest. And I was very interested to hear what the priest was going to say. Well, in the process of doing this, a woman came down, and when we were in back of the pews, there was like the center aisle went to the end of the pews, and then there was a large staircase that went down, and then it went down to this lower level, and it was all open. And when we were behind the pews, I kept asking my wife, why are we going up there? And somebody in the higher pews recognized Nancy. And so she came down, and it was like an instant recognition, like two souls that had not seen each other for ages, they embraced, and she invited Nancy up into the pews. Now,
But you're still,
Nancy, right? So it's like, well, she deserves it. She should be up there. So I'm like, well, what about me? I said, wait a minute. I'm looking and I'm going, there's a straight line. I could go right up those stairs. I can go sit in the pews and I'm going to listen to what this priest has to say. So I bolt up the stairs. I look around, I see all these empty seats. So I start moving towards one of the pews. As I got there, the people that were sitting in the pews moved right up to the end of the pews and blocked me from getting into the pews. And I'm like, well, this is ridiculous. So I just said, I'm just going to jump right over him. So I did jump right over him, sat down, and then the dream ends immediately. And I woke up and I went, oh, I have to be invited. You have to be invited in order to, you have to have grace bestowed upon you in order to know these higher truths. Well, I'm telling you right now, we're inviting anybody who wants to know this information. It will be given away. It's given away, but it is disseminated to those who are willing to listen to it. So, I mean, I know this can be heavy stuff and it can be deep stuff. And when I started reading Jung or alchemy, or I mean, God, it was like, what the heck is this? Or Rudolf Steiner? Are you kidding? I started reading the wrong book at the wrong, it's called Philosophy of Freedom. If you really want to bend your mind around something, Philosophy of Freedom, don't start with that book because it is very dense. But I can read it now and it makes complete sense. But 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I was trying to read this, it's hard, it's dense. So the best advice I can give to anybody is simply this: that if you're going to, belief is worthless. Don't believe us, right? But you also, in order to get to where you think you need to go, which is in a higher state of consciousness, you have to have faith, and faith is different. You have to place your faith in a vehicle. I mentioned this before, and one of the doctors told me this. Paul, in order to get to where you need to go to understand this information, you have to have faith in a process that will train you. So where do you place your faith? You place your faith within humanity, within those amazing, magnanimous souls who came before us, who left their testimony, their testaments for us to find and for us to add to, right? And so we have to have faith in humanity and in the process that trains us. It's ancient, it's timeless. It's not just here, it's in other worlds. And this has always been the process for us to learn. It's not going to come. It's not going to come with no effort. It's not going to just poof into your head. It's not going to be some kind of a transformation which you absorb through osmosis. It has to come through this process.
So beautifully said and shared. And these are invitations for people who want to, marinate in these vibrations with us, these insights, follow some of the breadcrumbs that we're sharing of things that lessons and things we've learned in our journeys. And interestingly, what you said too reminds me of, and maybe this is a podcast for another day, but there's this book called The Pilgrim's Progress. I think I've mentioned it before. It's an allegory of I would say, of the spiritual hero's journey. And it was written in like the 1600s. And I've been called back to that story more times that I can even count in the last 12 months. I've known about it, but it was not on my radar screen before that. And what I find fascinating, it was the same thing. There's people living it. It's an allegory, and we're going to close this out here, but this is a to be continued podcast because they all are. They're all to be continued. But he's living in the city of destruction with a civilization of people who've been reduced to kind of a small box of thinking that the city of destruction is all that there is, right? And one guy escapes, so they sound the alarm bells that somebody got out, and they're going to hunt him down because he needs to be brought back because nobody leaves the city of destruction. But there's a crew that's assigned to go to his apartment where he was living and try and figure out, like, why did he leave? Where did he go? Looking, and someone found a book, and somebody had left for him the sacred books, the sacred texts, who'd figured it out, that this isn't all there is. And so one of those guys is like, wait, the city of destruction isn't the only way to live. There's a whole other way. And so he gets going on the path, and more people try and go and snatch him and get him to come back, to go back to the land of sleeping in the city of destruction, thinking that that's all that there is. And in the end, he finds out that there's a city of light, right? And we're all, and he has to, and no one can do it for him. It's all the same things you're talking about. These are the teachers. They've left the breadcrumbs for all of us. We're breadcrumb leavers. All of us that have been somewhere in this journey, that have learned something, or, found some of the coordinates that we need to be following to set ourselves free. This is what we do. This is what I created Whole Soul Mastery for, as people who are in the avatar's journey, where we're discovering more about ourselves than we ever even thought possible, and we're setting ourselves free. So this is a to be continued, because there's so much more to be sharing, but we're being ourselves. We're being the wisdom and the knowledge and the light and all the things that we've gained in our journeys. And we're sharing that in this very real and authentic way. So Paul, I want to thank you for joining me and joining our listeners, who I know from the comments that people share, the ones that listen, especially all the way to the end, are deeply touched by some of the deep places we go. But some people are craving this depth instead of the surface level of living, right? Which is kind of the like neck up living, and they're not connected to their heart centers. Many people are craving this deeper look into things. So thank you. Thank you for joining me, Paul. We'll have you back. We're going to keep the conversations going. It's a big few weeks for all of us. We're still living with this lion energy. We're still incorporating and integrating, upgrading with it. And we're soon going to be moving into the month of September, right? It won't be long, and we'll be moving into this. And there's those yellow jackets, or that scorpion energy that's got that poisonous sting energy. And it's interesting, injecting poison. That theme is interesting, isn't it? And we're going to be going through this time. But those who rise above it, who see the city of light that lives beyond the city of destruction, we all might want to take a look at the Pilgrim's Progress. There's an animated film of it, at the very least, that people, I'll try and remember maybe to grab the link to that if I remember that, but you can look this up. And I think it was just produced in the last couple of years, so it's a fairly new animated film, but it really does a great job illustrating all the things we have to let go, right? To become that heart that is light as a feather that you were talking about. That is the Pilgrim's Progress. We're the pilgrims in progress. We are those pilgrims. And that book apparently I've heard that sold more copies of that than the Bible in the world throughout history. And isn't it interesting that not everybody knows about it? So fascinating, but conversations for another time. We're all those pilgrims. We're all those heroes, the avatars. We are in process. And, if we can have patience with ourselves and a lot of compassion, and know that there is work involved in this process, it's beautiful to go into the light, and it's beautiful to feel the frequencies of our divine union and our connectedness and unity consciousness. And it's also something that many of us who have the strength and the lion's heart, right? The lion heart inside us, that is able to also look into the city of destruction and know about it, right? And transfigure and transform those shadow aspects in ourselves that are still participating in the city of destruction. That is our work to be doing, right? To help set the wholeness of everything free. So we'll see you guys next month, hopefully, with another podcast with Paul and I. And I invite everybody to visit, Whole Soul Mastery on any of the social media platforms where you visit regularly. And blessings, everyone. Until next time, we'll see you again soon.